Welcome to the Beyond Data Management Podcast, powered by HS GovTech. Now here's your host, Cameron Garrison.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. As always on Tuesday, conversations with environmental health topics and professionals every Tuesday here on the Beyond Data Management Podcast. And I've been really looking forward to the conversation here today. I want to welcome in. We're going to actually go across the pond, as is said, and talk to a real thought leader, not just in the UK, but also internationally. I've been looking forward to this since we had a lengthy conversation in Phoenix at NEHA. He was doing a couple of presentations here, and really been looking forward to this conversation. Graeme Mitchell, and he is a senior lecturer at Liverpool University in environmental health. And Graeme, thank you so much. Are you 5.5 or 6 hours ahead of East Coast US right now?
Hi, Cameron. I'm about 5 hours ahead, so this is doable for me. This is not a problem.
Dinner time for you, though, so I try not to keep you too long. But thank you for making the time. You have just a fascinating story, and have done and continue to do a lot of really amazing things. You've authored some stuff, which we'll definitely talk about here today. But maybe to start, because I think Americans we're kind of, I think, famous for thinking that we're kind of the center of the universe. But environmental health is really it's global, especially in the developed world, and very developed, centuries-old practice in the United Kingdom. But what are some differences? It's probably a question you get all the time, especially when you come to the States. But at kind of a 30,000-foot view, you're familiar with, obviously, both countries and the way they do things. What are some of the things that stand out to you that are not the same, or where there's a sort of a departure in how approaches are taken between UK and the United States?
Yeah, I think the big one for me is to kind of realize an America in a lot of ways isn't one country, but it's like 50 little countries that occasionally get along with each other. And that's quite a bit of a shock to me, that you have federal legislation, you have state legislation, and you have local legislation, and they don't always agree at the same time. Whereas in the UK, okay, we have devolved bits, so we have Wales, we have Scotland, we have England, we have Northern Ireland, but essentially the legislation's the same. So if you're a business in the UK and you're in the north of England, and you've also got companies in the south of England, the law is the same. Whereas sometimes I get the impression in the States you're using different bits of legislation. Mm-hmm. It's only recently I found out you have food codes, the federal food code, but not everybody operates on the same version.
No, they don't. It's suggested, right?
Yeah. So that's really difficult. Of like, well, okay, I'm in Connecticut, I'm using this food code, but if I go to Texas, I'm on a totally different food code.
Yeah, hard for the operators too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big issues we had in the UK, obviously going back in time, but it really came up in the 90s, was businesses wanted consistency of inspection. That one of the things that drove them mad is that environmental health practitioners would go out and say different things. And if you're a national company, which officer is right? So we have this idea of what we call a primary authority now, where a business is a national business, got business properties all over the country, agrees with one local authority how they're going to do things, and that's kind of their standard, and it really gives them a bit more consistency across the country, so you can operate a lot easier because you know what's acceptable.
Yeah, it's a real pain point that people recognize. We were just talking to someone from a department in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is actually an extreme case, but they have over 300 locally governed boards of health just in that relatively small geographic size state. And she was literally saying that they hadn't updated their food code in the jurisdiction she was in, and they were still marking a violation if your hot holding was not 140, even though the latest FDA code had it at 135. And she goes, it's pretty embarrassing when an operator's like, I just got done with my training and it's 135. Do you want me to show you? But it's actually not, because they didn't update their code. Like it's a real thing. And even within the same state, sometimes it's chaos.
Yeah, it must be difficult, and particularly again, if you're looking to move. I mean, I don't know how common it is for people to sort of move across states to do different jobs, but it must be really difficult learning one food code, one set of standards, and then go to the next state next door and it's totally different. The other thing I picked up on is you got enforcement powers, but you seem to be very, very structured around working with business, and it's a lot more about compliance.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes I think in the UK, we've got some real draconian powers. I was listening to one of the guys from Phoenix talking about street vendors and the work they were doing to try and sort street vendors out, make sure food's okay. And I'm sort of thinking, you're bending over backwards to help these people. We just walk in and go, you know what? Stop. It's not happening, mate.
Yes. And, they'll use terms like in the US, it's training, which there's a role for educating and training for sure. But you're right. Industry has a lot of power. But certainly in a huge economy like the UK, there must be powerful business interests. How do you deal with that there, where you've got somebody who's politically connected or just a big part of the economy, and they're wanting you to be a little softer? Do you guys have those political battles there, or do you just really put the blinders on and just follow the law, which is harder to do in the States?
Yeah, I think we probably do just follow the law a lot more, because it's consistent across the UK. Again, without getting too much in the history of the UK and geography, we've got Wales, we've got Scotland, we've got Northern Ireland, we've got England. The UK's, the legislation is basically the same. There are some tweaks. So I think that gives us that kind of shield that we're all doing the same thing. And I don't think we have the same lobbying that you do in the States. I mean, there's a whole industry about lobbyists trying to shape Congress, Senate laws, that kind of thing. And while it does exist in the UK, I don't think it's as well developed. I don't think it's quite as powerful as it in the States. So it's easier for us to sort of say, well, look, this is wrong. This is what the law allows us to do. Let's go and do it.
Maybe one day we'll get it right. Like our cousins, one of your all-time sort of heralded prime ministers once said about the Americans, you can always count them to do the right thing after they've tried every other option first. And it feels like there's some days, especially with like the food code, that we're still in the process of experimenting with all the other options for a bit here. Travel.
You're a fairly young country. You've only been going 250 years. You're kind of like a teenager in terms of in global terms for countries.
Yeah, and the way, not to like get into a bunch of history, but also it's unique the way the country went about becoming a country. It's that rebellious streak, right? And I think you can see shades or shadows of how it was originally formed, even in the way people approach things today. That desire for, you can't tell me what to do.
That is a big difference. This idea of individualism. I think my experience is most Americans don't kind of like big government, which is odd because they like small government. They like really local government and being involved locally. And it was interesting when I was looking at sort of COVID, and we look back to the pandemic, as there are certain countries where there was a lot of trust in government. So there wasn't restrictions in place. We look at sort of the sort of Sweden and those kind of countries. And as we came further west, the trust in government kind of went a lot more. So the UK was okay. We trusted a bit. We were did what the government told us. Obviously, you get to the US and COVID, it's a wholly different attitude. And I think it does come back to that sort of pioneer spirit and that idea of independence.
I think that's so true. And so you bring up COVID, and you do a lot of media. You travel and speak a lot as well. But you did a lot of like with the BBC and things during the pandemic. Now that you've got a couple of years of history and you can sort of look back, and as an academic at a prestigious university, how did you all do? There's obviously you were in the same crisis, and so information is evolving. What is the sentiment there? You didn't have as much pushback for sure. Do the citizens now feel in retrospect that it was handled well? And what's the sort of the consensus of what would we do if, God forbid, there was a next time? Which I guess in the course of history there will be. But what is your thought now that you've had time to let it settle and it's now officially history?
I think there's a number of things. One thing we're doing in the UK at the moment, it's been going on for a couple of years, is we have a COVID inquiry. So this is an independent judicial review of how the government performed. And so that sort of every so often kicks in and stirs up those memories. I think when we look back, the problem with COVID, to my mind, is it's always coloured by the other great political issue of our recent times, which was Brexit. And broadly speaking, if you were pro-Brexit, you were pro-Boris Johnson and his government. If you were anti-Brexit, you were anti-Boris Johnson. So you automatically colour your view of how the government performed. I think that there is that feeling that we could have done better. That, what we're hearing now in the COVID inquiry, for example, we shut schools in the UK. But coming out of the inquiry, we're finding that the government only made that decision sort of the day before they decided to shut schools. And you do start to question, have we really learned these lessons? And when it happens again, because, there is going to be another pandemic, unfortunately, I think the worry is, are we just going to repeat it?
Yeah. And there's a jersey wearing, right? You touched on something interesting, and it's really pronounced here too, is if you identify with this party or this leader, somehow you give yourself permission to excuse criticality of anything that you might want to objectively take an honest look at. We have really gotten tribal. It sounds like you all have been that way too. Of course, Boris, I think everybody can instantly think of what he looks like with the hair, and he caught a lot of flack for having some parties too during lockdowns, didn't he?
Yes. I mean, this is the problem is, and again, without being far too political, you sort of look at the politicians and say, were they the right people to lead us? And the governments are giving us this message, stay at home, don't go out, don't mix with other people. And I think as a nation, we did really well. We took that on board. It caused a lot of heartache. It caused a lot of pain. And then you find out that those that are in power aren't following those rules. And there was a lot of anger about that, and it really was this idea of one rule for us and one rule for them. And I think when we look at the last election result in the UK, that's fed into it. The idea of the Conservative Party being in charge really lost a lot of trust.
Yeah, humans don't like hypocrites, generally speaking, right? Yeah. And we had that, and again, in the media sort of echo chambers that we have now in modern times, the poor restaurant, the French Laundry in California. It was a similar thing with the governor of California, right? And everybody just wanted to talk about, but you actually just nailed it. It was the rules for thee and not for me attitude. It's not that he went out to dinner or had a party. It's that he told you couldn't have one while he went and did it. And you actually asked the real core question, are we being led by the right people if there's that much tone deafness to the shared contribution? So yeah, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit trail, but it's always interesting to talk to the folks that were on the front lines and thought leaders to see how their thoughts have evolved on it now that, thank God, it's over and we're back to normal, whatever normal is these days. So you've had an amazing career, and you're not just a published lecturer and academic. You actually have worked and had worked for years in the field, right? So maybe let's back up and actually you really give some great speeches, and the internet is forever. Hopefully you're okay with looking at Graeme from 12 years ago, but David, the Cholera King clip. Let's play that real quick, and then let's talk about your journey and what you did in environmental health that ultimately led to what you're doing now. But I believe this was a lecture to students or potential students that you gave about 12 years ago, almost to the day. So, David, we'll play that clip.
This is King Cholera. because the water pumps, the people's water supplies wasn't directly into their houses, it was into the streets, and you'd have standpipes in the middle of the streets. It was a famous case in 1854, a guy called John Snow, Dr. John Snow, traced a cholera outbreak to a water pump. And effectively what was happening, the water pipe was coming in, that was fine. But on top of the water pipe was the sewer pipe. Both pipes were cracked, and all that was happening is the sewage was going directly into the water pipe, which was being drawn up the pump, and the residents of Broad Street were drinking it and getting cholera.
So what's fascinating about that is that you, so interesting. Like, this is back, America was arguing over going to civil war at that time, and you guys, like, there's a rich history of environmental health, and you very clearly are well versed in a lot of that history and how it's evolved and developed and what the key moments were. What caused you to fall in love with or get a passion for what you've ultimately committed your professional life to? What was your journey, and kind of how did you evolve, and what are the various things you did as you built a real reputation in environmental health, ultimately ending up at the university there in Liverpool?
Well, I'd love to be able to say it was a passion from an early age, and as soon as I could sort of walk and talk, I wanted to be involved in environmental health. But if I'm completely honest, like a lot of people, I fell into it. I was at school. I sort of hit 18, so that would be sort of graduation time for you. And I was going to go off and go to university. And back in the day, because we're talking late 80s, I said to my mum and dad, I said, I want to go to university, but I want a year out. I've had enough of education. I want to earn a bit of money, and I want to do a bit of traveling. And this is kind of before gap years were really popular with people. And my parents said, yeah, that's fine. But you're not living in this house rent free. You've got to go and get a job. So I kind of scouted around, and there was this job as a student environmental health practitioner in a local council, so a local sort of county, if you like. And I thought, yeah, it sounds interesting. And I kind of went for the interview. And I got the job, and I thought, great. They're going to put me through university. They're going to pay me. I'm going to do a bit of work. And I thought, well, I'll stick it for a year. If it doesn't pan out, if I really don't like it, I can hand my notice in, and I know I've got a place to do. It was psychology I'd planned to do at university. And I kind of stuck. I still never took that place up at university. I think they probably closed it by now. But I fell into it, and I was absolutely fascinated. And I think part of it is the kind of people that come into environmental health. I think deep down you want to make a difference. You want to see the good in people. I always say I'm a bit nosy. I like knowing things. I do get. I think with environmental health and public health, you want people who are angry, but angry in the right way. Angry people who look at a situation and go, that's not right, we need to change it. And so I started working as a student EHP. I went to university one day a week. I did sort of on-the-job training. I got a job with a county, and kind of then progressed slowly up the food chain in terms of management. So every I did a number of years with one authority, moved to another to move up to a slightly higher management position, and I moved up again until I was kind of running the dog control service, the pest control service. And at the time, the authority I was working in, we had a lot of money from Europe. So we were running the environmental hit squad, which sounds like really cool, like you go and assassinate people for dropping litter or something. It wasn't that grand, unfortunately, but it made a lot of difference. We had money to go and improve things, and it cut through a lot of red tape. And I was sort of enjoying myself. I enjoy history. I have a master's in history, so that's always great. And literally, I was in work one day and I saw this job advertised to run the environmental health program at Liverpool John Moores. And I sort of looked at it and I thought, I've got to apply. It sounds really interesting. And I thought, if I don't apply, in 6 months' time, I'll have a really bad day and I'll beat myself up for not applying. So the worst thing that you can do is offer me the job, and I've got to make a decision. So I applied. He asked me in for interview. Went for the interview, and it's one of those when you go into an interview and within the first sort of minute you think, you know what, I've either nailed this or they think I'm a complete idiot and they just want to sail through this interview as painlessly as possible. Obviously they didn't think that because they phoned me up and offered me the job, but I think I shocked them because I sort of said, well, can I have to think about it? And my boss at the time sort of knew I'd applied, and he sort of looked at me and said, go for a walk. Just go out of the office, go for a walk, have a think, and come back and tell me what you want. And I came back and I said, boss, I'm going. To which he swore at me and said, good luck. And I've been in university ever since. And I've got to be honest, I absolutely love it. I think being able to teach, being able to research, the opportunity it's given me to go across the world, I think it's an absolutely brilliant career.
And it's so interesting how everyone, a lot of in the States as well, some of the folks that you would have just assumed almost were born prepared to do this found it accidentally. Does that indicate to you an issue with, I hate to use the word promotion, but the marketing of who these people are, what they do, how valuable it is, how much science is involved in it? We've used the term a lot, almost the invisible profession. Do you agree with that? Is it the case in the UK too? And is there an answer or an idea of how maybe you can captivate the imagination of future generations of leaders before they are forced to pick it because mom and dad said you can't live there rent free anymore? That's a great story, by the way. Like if your parents had let you live rent free, you might not be where you are today.
Exactly. There's no way my parents would let me live rent free. I've got to be honest. Lovely parents, got to say that. I think you're absolutely right, and it is the right phrase. We are an invisible profession because the better we do our jobs, the less the public know about us. Because no one rings the county up and goes, you know what, I ate at a restaurant 3 days ago. I'd just like to ring up and say, I haven't been ill, thank you very much.
It's true.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's just like the news never says another plane landed safely at the airport today, right? It's the bell that never rang, the dog that never barked.
So this is the thing we've got, and I think it is getting the message through to young people. So when they get to 17, 18, environmental health becomes the career they pick at that point.
Yeah,
and they have a lot of choices. There's a lot of pressure, but it's getting the visibility of the profession to come through. Because when I do open days and we have people coming in to look at our courses, selling environmental health to parents is absolutely easy. Because what we're saying is, look, this is the career. This is how varied it is. This is what you can do. The world literally is your oyster. You can go and work anywhere in the world. You can, we work for a county. You can go and work for private industry. One of my graduates works on a cruise ship, and he's a lovely lad. He said, I've seen him last year. He said, I'm coming up to 30, and I've been to every continent in the world. I've been to over 80 countries. What a fantastic career! So selling it to parents is great because there's jobs out there. It's getting the message to younger people about this is what it is. And I think the way we do it is we've got to make that effort to reach out to school kids and not just those 17, 18-year-olds. We've got to get in a lot earlier just to get it on the radar.
Yeah, because you don't hear kids saying, I want to be a health inspector, right? When they're, they firefighter, athlete, like lots of things are pretty common. But you're right. If you actually could captivate them earlier, they'd plan for it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we did, I was in a school on Friday, and it was for 12-year-olds. And there was a group of us there. So we had people doing nursing, we had people doing a bit of paramedics. And it's how do we compete? What can we show them? And we actually ran, and it's the first time I've done it, I ran a zombie apocalypse scenario.
Really?
which was great. Yeah, it's a scenario based around the zombie apocalypse. And what it did is it took the very basics of an outbreak. So it doesn't matter if it's food or water, the principles of that. But if you do it as a food poisoning, it's a bit boring, or a waterborne. They might lose a bit of interest. But if you badge it as a zombie outbreak, it's different. It's dynamic. It's something they can kind of see and relate to. But it's getting that hidden message in of then saying, well, okay, this is a zombie apocalypse. This is a zombie outbreak. As an EHP, I've never dealt with zombies yet, but I've dealt with all these other things that use exactly the same principles. And it's starting that conversation. It's getting that awareness into those minds at a young age.
Yeah, and you said something too, like a nosy. A curiosity about the world is actually critical for the job, right? You guys have the best stories, like you really, really do. And in fact, let's show one of them. David, let's do let me just look at my clip list here, make sure I tell you the right one. Mouse in sliced bread. So this was also you. And it reminded me of how you guys have the best stories. This is also just me showing you what you presented years ago. I think at the time you called it one of your favorite environmental health pictures. So tell us what this is. I think it's pretty evident if you look at it for more than 5 seconds, but the slice part's really artful, isn't it?
It is. I actually showed this to a group of students today.
Really?
I still use it. Yeah, it is genuinely, it is my favorite picture of environmental health. And I think what I like about it, and this is how sad and twisted we can become, unfortunately, is not only is the mouse being baked into the loaf of bread, but the fact it's been sliced as well. And students look at it and go, "You photoshopped that." And it's like, no. When you deal with environmental health, you don't need to Photoshop anything. The real world is far more interesting and fascinating.
Yes, and I think, and I know it's the trivial part of it, but I think things like that picture in the stories, especially for curious kids, makes them full of like wonderment. And you also said that no one's ever said it this way before. You said you have to be angry, but in the right way. Like having a mouse sliced into the bread is definitely something worthy of being a little outraged about. But it feels like there are some aspects of the job that are almost made for the social media age, right? If we just, you don't want to use them in a sensational way, but I don't know how you could look at that picture we just looked at it and say anything other than, well, the person who does that job and took that picture must have a really fun job.
It is. And again, even if people go, oh, that's horrible, it's an int for a conversation. It's something that allows you to talk about. Because the other thing, obviously, with environmental health, it's so broad. And I say to students, where do you want to go? You know, I have students, I have graduates who really like enforcement. That's what they love to do. I have students who are really into community engagement and community empowerment. You know, and if you want to go down that line, absolutely. We've got graduates who are really into policy and legislation, and they've gone down that line. It's like, what do you want to do?
Yeah, and you need everybody to have you need people for all those interests, right? Because every one of those is critical linchpins in the overall system.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, really, where do you want to go? It is entirely up to you. You've got a career where you can really drive the direction. You've got real choice about where you're going with this. You know, certainly at university, we give you all the basics, we give you all the tools, but the decisions you then make, where you end up, is entirely up to you, which is brilliant.
Is money a obstacle in the UK? I know in the US, in some states, it's worse than others. You have to have the science degree. So you go and you invest in that education, and a lot of times the public sector job offers that will come to you just don't stack up to what, you know, especially in today's age of so many multinational companies and industry. A lot of times they, at least in the US, have a problem with recruiting because the compensation just doesn't compete with what somebody with that degree can earn privately. Is that a struggle for universally, including over there as well?
It's a similar situation. I mean, it was always traditionally when you went into local government, when you went into sort of the counties, it was always a trade-off that, yes, you could earn more money in the private sector. But the trade-off was you would get a better pension if you were working for the local authority, that you would get a lot more job security. And it was kind of that trade-off. I think that's changed over the past sort of 10, 15 years, that the local authority, local government isn't as secure as it was, that the pension deals probably aren't as good as they were in the past. And I think people are much more willing to go and work into the private sector. It's not seen as the outlier for environmental health. I mean, it always used to be in the UK that if you went into the private sector, you'd always gone over to the dark side. That somehow you were seen to have crossed the line. You were no longer a Jedi, you were a Sith, and that was a bad thing.
And that has definitely softened now, right? I know in the U.S. at least, there's almost a revolving door at times. People will leave a public agency and they'll go to, we've had them on this show, like the Texas Roadhouse or the vice president of food safety at Wendy's. And actually, I think it's been good here because they know each other and they've worked together, and industry actually is able to, in some cases, collaborate more openly with the department by just having that continuity of history by people going to the dark side.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's far more acceptable for people to go from a local authority into the private sector and then back into local authority and change, swap and change. And I think you're also right. That understanding is really important. One of the things we do is with our final year students, we actually have a scenario-based exercise around occupational health and safety. We have very good links with a company called A.S. Watson. And we get their managers in and we mix them up into teams with our students and we run through a scenario. So we give them some information and then say, okay, what would you do at this point? And the purpose of it is to get our students who are potential enforcers understanding how business works, that there are restraints on businesses. And it also allows business to understand how enforcers work. If they're asking for something, it's not because they just don't like you. This is the way the law works. And that's been really beneficial because ultimately we both want the same thing. Businesses want to work safely. They don't want to hurt their customers. They don't want to hurt their employees. They want a good brand. And all this ties into environmental health.
Yes, and the outcomes are better. You're right. Businesses don't want to make their customers sick. And so, yeah, there is common purpose at the bottom of it. You wrote something that's actually, you can find it on Amazon. It was the Introducing Environmental Health. I'm sure that rings a bell with you. And just even in the description of it, in the Amazon.com listing, probably .uk where you are, but it talked about, and I'll just actually read it here, that you eschewed some of the traditional line of thought of how to go about environmental health, paving the way for a reformed approach to EH, including chapters on risk, health inequalities, globalization, controls, communications, and research. What is your sort of view on, if you were king of the world and could set sort of the universal approach, where are we missing the mark, and what do you think we should be doing? Like the globalization part jumped out to me, maybe with supply chains and things, but what is your view of, in a perfect world, how you would look at environmental health and set certain things up to really drive for success on the most important things?
I mean, I think you're right on the globalization side of things. Is we are an increasingly smaller world, and I think we've got to understand how we interconnect with each other, and whether that's in terms of supply chain for food, whether that's in pollution, whether that's in climate change. And increasingly, we're seeing the effects of climate change across the globe. It's no respecter, and they've always said, in the past, that pollution was no respecter of borders. So I think that interconnectivity is really good. The other thing I think also that drives this is coming back to a very simple word, which I think is at the heart of environmental health, which is risk, and how we manage risk, how we communicate risk, how we mitigate risk. And that I think is the core that we drive forward. One of the other things I would say is that a colleague in Australia to pass some information through. And there tends to be buzzwords around, and I've lived through quite a few buzzwords, I'm afraid. But the idea of One Health is current at the moment. And actually, One Health is environmental health. When we're looking at human health, animal health, plant health, the environment, all that's that connectivity. That's environmental health. That's what we do. These things, we understand that all these things are linked together. If we have contaminated water supplies, that will affect humans, it will affect animals, it will affect the planet. So I think those are the things I would drive forward, is that message of that interconnectivity and that managing of risk is key.
Yeah, and everything is now just a plane ride away from being on our shores, right? Like we have, it went crazy because a month or so ago we did something with Dr. Dijak from NEHA about the screwworm, the New World screwworm, and we'd eradicated that a long time ago, but it's back. And like it ended up doing like 700,000 views because it shocks people, because I think we have this idea of, well, that's in China or half a world away. That's a long way from here. That's third world, right? There's assumptions, not always proper, that get made, but that's not the case, right? I'm sure you guys have things resurging there probably, don't you, that you thought you may never see again or people got complacent about?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things is to sort of think about, if you get to an airport, you're no more than 24 hours away from every major city on the world. So if we go back to pandemics, the ease of us transmitting new diseases, new infections is far better than it was 50, 60 years ago. We do see resurgences of stuff. One of the things, and again, it links kind of into COVID, is measles. Like the US, we start to see a number of cases, or an increase in cases of measles. Now, for us, we'd kind of conquered measles. We hadn't eliminated it, but we were classed as a country as measles free. Any measles cases were people, children coming into the country who already had it. When we see vaccine hesitancy, when we see people not taking up vaccines, that really affects measles because we're losing that herd immunity. So we're seeing that resurge a bit.
Yeah, like that herd immunity was long fought by a couple generations of public health professionals. And yeah, back to the unique American spirit of, you can't tell me what to do. If I want my kid to have measles, I'll give it to them. And I know no parent actually says that, but kind of what it feels like, right? Sometimes, especially when it resurges in communities that it's not really been seen in at levels before. So you talk about it being an ecosystem and everything being connected. I think you have an abstract submission, and I'm pretty sure they will schedule this for a keynote, and I really hope they do. But I think one of the ones that's interesting, I think it ties to this, an abstract that you have in for NEHA 2026 in Kansas City, is about what people think of the terminology, right? Or the environmental health or environmental health professional. And we were talking off air about, and it's common, like everybody sort of has an anecdote on this, that the name is almost too generic and doesn't really convey. But I think you actually submitted your abstract based on some research that was done. If you are able to, do you want to talk a little bit about that? It also goes back to that marketing or PR problem, right? If you don't name something descriptively, or people don't understand what it means, it's hard for them to form an attachment to it. Any sneak previews you want to give us on what people will very likely see at NEHA in Kansas City next summer, around the gap in terminology and what people think it is versus what it really is?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's based around a dissertation one of our students did, and she was looking at, what do people understand about environmental health? What do they know about environmental health practitioners? And really, I think what she came up with was the idea that when you look at the word environmental health, people split it into two, and they either focus on the environment bit, in which case they think you're into conservation, you're into green issues, and that's all you're in. Or they focus on the health bit and they think it's some form of nursing, medical aspect to it. They don't join the words together. And I think that is a real problem, is that if people don't understand who we are, they've no idea what we do. It's interesting when you look at terminology in the UK. The very first environmental health practitioner was a guy in Liverpool called Thomas Fresh back in 1844, and his job title was Inspector of Nuisances. Then they became sanitary inspectors. Then they became public health inspectors. And then we became environmental health officers. That changed to practitioners in the UK because officers had too much of a local government feel to it. And increasingly, people were working in the private sector. So the name has sort of evolved and changed. You could argue if we went back to public health inspectors, people would have a better idea about that. Environmental health is still a phrase people don't get.
Yeah, it's very generic, actually. And you've made the point probably many times before when you speak. Environmental health is public health, right? Like you can't actually divorce those two things because they're part and parcel of the exact same public health mission.
Absolutely, and we trace our roots to public health. The modern public health of Edwin Chadwick's report in 1842, and certainly in the UK, it is public health all the way through. From a UK perspective, what happens is round about the mid 1970s, public health gets split, and the enforcement side, so the food safety, the occupational health and safety, stays within local government. And the more promotional side of things, so smoking cessation, dealing with obesity, moves to our NHS because that's seen as a more medical function, and that's where we get the phrase environmental health tends to come in the UK. Now we're sort of fast forward to the mid 2015. Public health has now moved back from our medical NHS back into local government control. So whether there's a rationale to change the name is a possibility.
Yeah. And if you want to recruit the next generation of talent, it's a good idea if they can understand in a sentence at least a good idea of what you do. While we're on the topic of your NEHA, we just talked about the fascinating topic of an abstract for next year. I believe did you did one at NEHA because you did a couple green funerals, green burial. Was that one of your ones at NEHA, right?
That was one of mine at NEHA. Yeah, that was an interesting one. It's a bit of an interest of mine. And the logic behind it is, as people become more environmentally aware, whilst they're alive, they do things to protect the environment. They try and think sustainability. They try and reduce their carbon footprint. So we're very environmentally aware. And the idea is that when they die, then they'll want to carry that forward. They'll want to be disposed of, if you like, in a way that causes the least impact on the environment. And really, that session was to kind of start a conversation with environmental health practitioners to say, look, this is coming. This is a trend that is coming. And as a profession, if we think about it now, it gives us a chance to get ahead of the curve a bit. And I think sometimes as a profession, we play catch up an awful lot. Something happens and we then react to it. And I think, as an example, the beauty industry, certainly in the UK, that changes all the time, and EHPs are constantly catching up with what's happening. And I think the idea of the green funerals, that this is what people will be looking to do, and that's driven, as I say, by environmental awareness, I think, is a big one. I think cost drives it as well, because funerals sadly are very expensive. Certainly in the UK, it sounds daft, but space. We're a much smaller country. We've got a bigger population density. We are going to run out of space to bury people as we've done in the past. So all these factors are going to make the availability of green funerals far more attractive. And it's about how do we get ahead of the curve? Because at the moment in the UK, and I suspect in the States as well, there's very little control around disposal. I could set up as a funeral director in the UK, and there's kind of no regulations in such respect. There's no requirements for me to have done any training or to be registered with a professional body or anything like that. And
Wow.
we've seen cases both in the UK and I think it was in Colorado in the States about people not disposing of bodies correctly. They're giving the wrong ashes back to people. In some cases, it was concrete dust and it wasn't their ashes.
Yeah.
And this is something
Fraud.
we've got to get angry about.
Yeah. Yes. If you can't get angry about that, like something wrong with you. Just for folks, because it is new here, I think you're right to be ahead of the curve. It's not mainstream, I don't believe, yet in the States. What is the general concept of green funeral, green burial?
Well, green funerals, green burial, it's kind of a generic term. It's going to mean a lot to different people. The standpoint I took was to look at things that are different than the traditional burial, sort of the casket, burial, that kind of thing that we would normally do. So there's lots of different options available. So we could consider cremation as part of a green funeral. And even within cremation, we've got crematoria. We've got the idea of open sky cremation, where it is like a funeral pyre. We can look at water cremation, alkali hydrostasis, I think it is, where effectively you go in, the body goes into a chamber, chemicals are added, it's under heat and pressure, and what comes out effectively is a liquid. There's then issues of, well, how do we dispose of that? You can then sort of go for human composting, again, where what we do is we subject the body to heat and temperature and pressure. We try and then turn it into a compost, which people then will take. You get sort of more extreme things that don't exist as such, but the theory exists of do we freeze dry people? And effectively, once they're freeze dried, vibrate them, so what is left is a dust, and people are then given a dust bath. So there's a whole world of things, and people will look for this. Sometimes it will be a novel approach, sometimes it'll be a different approach, but it's being aware, what are the impacts of this?
Do you think is there a conversation in the political will to actually stand up some regulations to, like you talked about the case from Colorado, just horrible. And I think people are shocked to learn that pretty much anybody can go into business as a funeral director if they want to. Is this something that you think is going to ultimately happen? Is there the political will to actually sort of stand up some best practices and even light regulation around all this?
I think it's one of those that is politics driven by people or people driven by politics? I kind of think that at the moment we have a society that really doesn't want to think about death. And one of the things I would say is that we've kind of medicalized death. That there is an idea that maybe we should try and reclaim it. That sadly we are all going to die. If you go back to Roman times, the idea of treating each day as if this was your last kind of thing, and then having a good death, we seem to have moved away from that. We want to avoid it. We don't want to have those conversations. And I think when you have a very medicalized society, a lot of the medics try and prevent death. That's what they're there for. And I sometimes think because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do it. So I think those conversations are difficult to have because I think as a society we don't want to have those conversations. We kind of want to avoid it. We don't want to think about it. And because we're sort of abstaining from that decision, avoiding those decisions, that's why we haven't got regulation, because there's no support for it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because you're right. And also it's death is sanitized too, right? Because of all the medical interventions, like people don't see. I'm not advocating people should see death, but it's almost not far removed, and we like keeping it out of our mind. And you're 100% right. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but there's a bias to consider. Want to even think about it. Wow. Now, when you say there's things we can do that we shouldn't, are we talking about, ranging off just a little bit here, are we talking about like just keeping people basically alive when there's no like they're just sort of there a shell, and technically they have a pulse kind of thing. Like we've gotten so into the avoidance of death that we sometimes extend it when it's not even in the interest of the person suffering.
I think so. I mean, first of all, I'm not a proponent of euthanasia. I'm not suggesting we do that.
Yeah.
I remember Logan's Run. I think it was 35, and that's it. You're done. I'm certainly not sort of making those arguments. But I think you're right. Sometimes we got to look at the quality of life rather than the quantity of life. And as I say, just because medical procedures have advanced and we can keep people alive, is it about the quality of someone's life? And do we need to do this? And you hear people sort of making decisions of saying, well, actually, I don't want treatment. The treatment you're going to give me is invasive, it's painful, there's a lack of dignity sometimes. I'm making a conscious decision. I'm going to have what's left. I'm going to go for the quality rather than the quantity. And I think we start to need to have those conversations as a society, with our family, with our friends. Because if we abdicate that responsibility, it becomes a much more medical, as you say, it becomes more medicalized, it becomes more remote. People go into hospital to die. And that's not always what people want.
Yeah, passing away with great healthcare workers, but strangers. While on a lot of medication. On a more, I think, hopefully less depressing. I think, as you just pointed out, that's one of the reasons that people avoid it. Is we're all destined for it, but it's depressing, so we'd rather not think about it. You've traveled the world, worked with people all over the world. You've done some work around AI and its intersection with environmental health, I believe, haven't you? And what have you done with that? And as you look out at the future, clearly this is going to change people's lives, and it's here to stay, which means it's going to have a role in environmental health. But how are you thinking about that based on the study and the research you've done to date?
Well, we did an article. We have an organization called the Breakfast Club, which is sort of driven by a great colleague of ours in Australia, Kirsten Ross, that has Dave Dijak from the States, has myself, a couple of other colleagues from the UK, people from Portugal, people from Estonia. So it is real sort of global think tank, if you like. And we come up with these sort of random ideas of what should we think about for environmental health. And that kind of led to the article. I think on the back of that, recently I was asked to speak at the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health conference in Wales around AI and the challenges and opportunities for environmental health as a profession. And I think what I'd say is that while you can, I'm kind of loath to use the phrase AI proof. I think environmental health to a great extent is AI proof, because the value of boots on the ground, the idea of going out and dealing with people and dealing with situations, that is always going to remain. And I don't think technology will ever take that away. And AI can assist us. I mean, there is a role for it. It can streamline operations. It can, speed up admin and that kind of thing. But I would say, boots on the ground is really important. We've got to be clever with AI, and one of the phrases that's been used by sort of my colleagues at university who are into technology and that is, AI is not going to take your job.
Right.
But people who know how to use AI will, because there is a skill in prompting of using AI correctly. And I think there's great potential for it because AI can handle big data. And one of the things I'd be really interested in is, as a profession, we go out and inspect food premises. Now, I don't know about the States. In the UK, we might not inspect every year. But how do we flag up those premises that could be on a downward slope? So they're going to decline in those standards. Now, an inspection is only ever a pinpoint in time, snapshot in time. Could we use AI to scroll through things like TripAdvisor, all these sort of rating sites for food premises? And can we teach it to pick up on negative language? And is that going to be an indication that if we start to see that negative language being used by the users, is that going to tip us off that actually hygiene standards are falling as well? So there's great potential there,
And
but it's never going to replace it.
So I couldn't agree more, because it's, I think, the number one apprehension that agencies have when they think about looking at what they can do with it is, well, we already have a hard enough time we've already had our staff reduced over the years so many times. And I tell them the same thing. I'm like, you can't have a computer that does thoughtful, like you said, boots on the ground observation. Like that's just not what AI is set up for. It would be a stretch to get it there. But I loved what you said too about it's not going to take your jobs, but the people who know how to use it will, because I think you're right. It's a tool, and you can actually make you smarter, but you still got to use your judgment to actually go put your boots on the ground and do the work. And so I think that apprehension really bears hammering on, because it's not like, if you're a transcriptionist and you take audio recordings and transcribe them, yeah, you're probably getting put out of a job by AI. But you by definition, you're paid for your reasoning, not your robotic skills as a human when in this profession. And I think if I sort of replayed any of that wrong, correct me, but I think that's what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. And I hope everybody really takes that to heart, is embrace the tool as your friend. Can you imagine trying to do inspections now on just paper with the carbon between them? Like you embrace the tool of the computer, but it didn't replace your job. And it sounds like you don't see it much differently than that either.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I date myself. I go back when I first started. We had a typing pool. If I wanted letters sent out, I didn't type them. I didn't go on the computer. I had a typing pool. And one of the great skills at the time is being able to convince a typist that your letter was a priority. And although these, the typists were on fairly low wages, they held a huge amount of power. But it's about learning how to use it. And the other sort of phrase I would sort of put in, the other mantra is trust but check. AI is good, but it's not perfect. And we've got to, as a university, we've got to teach our students how to use AI, because when they hit the real world, they will be working for people, and they'll be saying, right, I want to report on air quality. We've got some councillors need a report. Do me a report on the importance of air quality. Now, traditionally, that would take a couple of days to do. Stick it into AI, get something in 5 minutes. But you need to check it right. Yeah. That's the thing. You can't assume it's okay. So it is a tool for us. It's a very useful tool, but we handle it with care.
Yeah, because it hallucinates, right? Which is a nice word for just being wrong. The other thing, though, too, is, don't you think, and I saw this over the last 20 years with agencies that were reluctant to get off of paper-based inspections. And what I think they learned the hard way, the people that were resistant, is you already, as we talked about, there might be some pay gap between what top of the mark would be in the private sector. And so you at least have to be moving forward with technology to be able to be attractive and recruit people, right? Like you have to. And so do you agree there's an argument to be made that agencies should be thoughtfully looking for ways to incorporate it, because more and more over time, future graduating classes coming into the profession are going to almost have an expectation that it plays a role?
Absolutely. And I think, when we look at people coming through and generations coming through, they are far more tech savvy than myself. They've grown up with iPads, they've grown up with technology. It is far more intuitive for them to use it. And I think, if we use it rightly, we can be more accurate, it can be quicker, it can be more flexible. So why shouldn't we be using it to make what is sometimes a very difficult job easier? If you've got people out inspecting, that's the hard part, identifying what the problems are, dealing with the people involved, dealing with the issue. Anything we can do to make the admin side easier is got to be a win, and it's got to be attractive, because you are then saying to your staff, you can spend more time on what the core issue is.
And I love the example you said about because you always have probably generally more inspections that you could do than you have time and people to do them. And if you did have the AI being able to say, on a large pool of data, maybe national in some cases, if it's a restaurant with this type of profile or this type of menu and look at their historical performance, they are at a statistically higher chance of having something bad happen again in the future. And so you might actually lean into them more, and you may be able to sort of green list or whitelist, if you will, some places that you don't have to go into but every 2 years because they fit a profile that puts them at a lower risk. And I think you were kind of going there with one of your examples of it. I think that has a lot of potential because right now, especially in the States, it's all in a vacuum, right? A lot of times an agency can't not see beyond whatever data they've collected on their own inspections, and sometimes they have trouble with that. There's no ability to say, okay, let's zoom out to the state level, the federal level, and let's see how all of this works together and which places are going to drive problems versus which ones are good actors.
Yeah, and it comes back to what I was saying before, that little word, risk. That's what we deal with. And if you use AI to help us manage that risk, to identify those premises that are going to cause us more problems or likely to decline in standards, those are the ones we want to target. That makes much more sense. I've worked in local government for a long time, and it's probably true in the States. I've seen lots of cuts. No one gives you more money, and you got to deal with everything gets smaller, so it's working not necessarily harder, it's working smarter at times.
Yep, and not just following a random checklist that just wastes a lot of cycles. So on AI, that's just curiosity, because you're in academia and you hear some professors will come out and say, oh man, kids aren't working anymore, they're just having ChatGPT spit their paper out night before it's due. Is that a real trend? Are you, being in a university environment, are students relying more and more, even anecdotally from what you can tell, on whatever the computer spits out is what I'm turning in? Or is that just the overblown hype from us older people who are maybe less comfortable with it?
Students certainly use AI. And one of the things we want to do is get them to use it in the right way, because we can't ignore it. That genie's out the bottle. It's like saying to students now, you can't use the internet. It's there. And it is about managing it in the right way. What I think AI has done is killed the essay as a form of assessment. Gone are the days of someone saying, okay, write me a 4,000-word essay on why food poisoning is bad, because AI can do that in minutes, if not seconds. Again, though, I think whilst the concern in academia is that students will cheat their way through, if you just give them an essay title and put it in, and AI can produce a decent piece of work, what academia has to do is then deal with that, and you create an assessment that doesn't allow the student to do it. And I think environmental health is in a really strong position here, because what we can do is link our assessments to far more practical issues. Those scenarios, those case studies, there's lots of them about for environmental health. So that's what we'll start to be drawing them from. So instead of an essay on food poisoning, it will be, okay, here's some data. And we'll use insider knowledge. So the students have to turn up to the sessions to get the knowledge to write, to deal with the assessment. And I think the knock-on effect for that, for the profession, is you're getting students who are a lot more savvy about what goes on. If I get a case of food poisoning, I've got an idea of how to deal with it, rather than an essay of why food poisoning was bad.
Yeah, and a critique that happens, right, sometimes is like, an academic, they're great about writing a paper about it, but hey, we need to do something about it. That's, well said on that. So the fun part, you actually don't just teach it, right, and lecture on it. You've done it in the field and worked for and with local government for a huge swath of your career. You've certainly come across stories in that time, right? And so I tell you what, I'm going to prime the pump on the stories. And David, let's go to the let's see, the fingertip. So I thought this one was great from your presentation. I was actually cringing and laughing when I was watching it last night. That actually happened, right? Tell us what this picture is, and I think the 5 pence piece is there for scale, right?
Yeah. So a 5 pence piece is probably, if I'm right, this is about the size of a dime, I think. That kind of size. So it gives you some idea of scale. And the story is that a lady goes with her family to a pizza restaurant. And the deal with the pizza restaurant is you go, you order your pizza, and while you're waiting for the pizza, there's a salad bar. So you go and fill up on salad, you eat your salad while you're waiting for your pizza to arrive. And so the lady does that, and she sits down and she bites into that piece of finger, which is obviously not good.
No.
Not what you want, because it's a fair old chunk of finger. Now, the story behind this is that she obviously complained, and she contacted her environmental health department with the finger.
Understandable.
Which, it's not what you want. So the environmental health investigated, and what they found out is with this particular restaurant is they didn't actually, when they looked at the salad, they didn't prepare any of the salad on site. It was all pre-prepared.
Like a
so
bag?
The tomatoes, yeah, it was all bagged up. So the tomatoes were pre-cut, the salad, the lettuce were pre-cut, all that kind of thing. And they traced it back. There was one warehouse in the UK that provided salad for all these restaurants. So what the EHPs did in this case is they went out, they DNA tested the finger. So they got DNA off the finger.
Wow.
They then went into the central warehouse and they DNA tested all the staff and they got a hit. And that proves beyond all reasonable doubt, no court of law is going to throw that out, that finger had come from that bit of skin had come from a finger of someone who worked in that premises. So you've got that clear evidential link.
And also, David, if you pull that picture back up, I also have to assume that the DNA was just like what made it ironclad, because I would assume if you asked to see everybody's hands, that is not a small piece of finger. Like, I don't think that grows back.
This is it. You sort of like, if you get everybody to hold their hands up, and someone with only 9 fingers is obviously the person. But you can see, that's a fair chunk. And one of the other issues we've got is that, that's caused a lot of blood. That's caused a lot of problems. But you do wonder, in places like this that are on very low wages, maybe 0-hour contracts, if you don't turn up, you're not going to get paid, and you're not going to get another shift for another few weeks. Do people try and hide this? Do the employees try and hide it because they think they're going to get in trouble? And if they get in trouble, they're not going to get paid. They're going to lose the job. So there's that kind of food culture thing as well that you're dealing with.
That is, and they're actually hiding it to protect their livelihood. I would dare think in a lot of cases that probably, especially in the manufacturing setting, it's a brutal job, and you're right, they'll just turn through staff. So what's the craziest, not to put you on the spot, but that sort of encounter or situation you had to personally deal with when you were on the government side of things, and maybe how'd you go about it? And it could be funny, terrible, gross, serious, captain's choice. And any stories that we don't have pictures for that come to mind that you like to share?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite stories is there's a piece of legislation in the UK called the Dangerous Wild Animals Act. And basically what it says is there are certain animals in the UK, if you want to own them, you need a license. And that license is issued by the local government. And as part of that license, there's lots of sort of criteria on you. So you've got to have insurance. You're inspected every year by the local authority and a vet. You've got to make sure it's safe for you. You've got to make sure it's not going to attack your neighbours, all that kind of thing. This legislation came in the 1970s. And one of the ideas, we have these legends of big cats in the UK. And they actually think it might be true that, back in the 1970s, people who had sort of panthers and stuff like that suddenly had to get a license and had lots of control over them. And rather than sort of comply, just released it out into the wilderness.
Oh, wow.
So there is a train of thought. But I had a phone call once from a guy, and he said, can I have a dangerous wild animals license? I said, well, what do you want it for? He said, I'm going to buy a dwarf Cayman crocodile. I said, oh, right. Where are you buying it from? And he said, well, I'm buying it from this fella, this bloke, and he won't sell it to me until I've got a license. So can I have a license, please? I said, okay. I said, where do you live? And he told me his address. And he lived in a sort of terraced house, literally a 2 up, 2 down terraced house, tiny property. And I said, where are you keeping the crocodile? And he said, it's all right. I'm going to keep it in the bath. And
The bathtub?
The bathtub. I'm going to keep it in the bathtub. I said, look, mate. I said, crocodiles are about 9 foot long. They're about 3 meters long. A dwarf crocodile is smaller, but they're about 2 meters. They're about 6 foot long.
But it's still a crocodile.
You're not keeping a 6 foot crocodile in your bath. He said, no, there's no way. And he said, oh, I think you're being unreasonable there. I said, no, I think I am being very reasonable, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no. And hopefully he had more than one bathtub in the house, because you don't want to have to compete with a crocodile every time you need a bath.
Yeah. The type of properties, it would have had 1 bathroom.
Wow. People are crazy.
Yeah.
That's insane. And yeah, I actually just pulled one up on the computer. I would not want to meet that crocodile anywhere out in the wild. It is a dwarf is sort of a misnomer, because the adult ones are really big.
Yeah.
And people end up dumping those into sewers. We have an issue with that in the U.S. They'll dump them into creeks and sewers, and then you end up with random alligator populations because some entitled jerk wanted a pet and it got too big for them.
Yeah, we don't have that so much. We're kind of alligator free. We're okay.
Let's hopefully keep it that way. Hopefully somebody doesn't order one off of the internet and bring it over. Oh, there they are, right there. Yeah, you look at the eyes on that thing. Yeah, that's a crocodile. So that's legal to own in the UK. You just have to be able to basically prove you're able to keep it safely and get the license.
Yeah, but the license is quite sort of strict. It's about, obviously there's an animal welfare side to ensure the animal is looked after properly. But the key thing is, obviously, you've got to house it in such a condition that it's not going to get out, it's not going to be a danger to you, and it's certainly not going to be a danger to people in your neighbourhood. So, people do have sort of tigers in the UK, but actually it's quite rare for a private individual to have tigers, because of the requirements that you need to look after them, the systems you've got in place, the physical structures you need. It's quite expensive.
And they need a lot of space. I bet the license isn't cheap either, is it? It's probably a pretty pricey annual license.
To be honest, the license fee is going to be really quite cheap compared to everything else. I would say when I was running it a few years ago, it was probably a couple of $100. So it's
that's not bad.
That's not bad for the license. It is all the other things you need in place.
A tiger's going to eat probably that much money in meat for breakfast, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are really crazy. I it's so romantic, the concept of, having a wild animal, but think, people, before you do that. I don't know that many states license them here, so that's an interesting way to go about it there. Well, I know that it's past dinner time where you are, and we've kept you for a while. You've just done so many things. We'll have to actually have you back. But from your seat, I think you're in an interesting seat, because you're seeing the next generation come through, right? You're teaching them, you're lecturing them, you're helping shape their minds for the future of the field. When you look into the future, maybe 2 data points. What gives you optimism from what you observe when you look into the future, gives you reason for hope? And what keeps you up at night? Maybe we're not talking about it, we should be, or you're like, wow, this is going to be a problem. So like, it's almost like a good news, bad news kind of thing, because you're in an interesting place to referee that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the optimism is when you look at the students coming through, there is still that desire. We don't get a lot of students through, but those that come through have that passion. And I think as a profession, we are still getting people in with a real passion to make a difference. We don't get students who turn up at university and do environmental health because they don't know what else to do. You know, the mum and dad told them to go to university, the school expects them to go. So the positive side is we're still getting people into the profession. I think the negative side is that there are a lot of issues on the horizon that aren't being dealt with or fully understood. And we look at things like climate change. We look at pandemics. And you kind of look at them and go, look, it's coming. There is going to be another pandemic. It's not a question of when, it's a question of if. And why are we not prepared? Why are we not thinking about this now? Certainly within the UK, you know, with issues around climate change, one of the things we potentially could experience is more heat waves. Now, as a nation, our infrastructure is just not built for excess heat. We get periods of, you know, if we have 40-degree heat for 3 weeks, we're going to have serious issues. You know, our infrastructure is going to be really compromised. And you do feel that these kind of decisions are being postponed at the highest levels, that as a nation, as a community, we kind of don't want to think about them. You know, particularly pandemics. People have been through COVID. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They want to forget about it and move on. So those are the challenges, I think, is that there are some big issues on the rise that can make real differences. And I don't think we are grasping them politically or socially.
And so it's interesting. I think back to what we were talking about, how people don't want to face death. It's almost like, obviously, at the individual level, it's like it doesn't compute. Don't want to go there. But it almost sounds like from that answer that there's almost like a societal urge to not think about societal risks and death as well. We almost do in the abstract or in the big picture what we each do individually, don't we?
Yeah, and I think it's that the bigger picture thinking that, and again, whether people do that anymore, you know. And I think one of the things with COVID, we saw a lot of good community work. People came together as communities. You know, they really bonded over it. But what they learned is actually it's a lot of hard work to be a community. You know, as a society, if we all want to benefit, we all got to work together, and it's not a given.
Yeah, it's a microwave culture, right? We want what we want right now. I mean, I think I could probably, maybe not an alligator or a tiger, although David did confirm in the booth that North Carolina is on the list, along with South Carolina. North Carolina is where we are, Nevada, Florida, Arkansas, and Texas. You can own a tiger or a crocodile, but they do require a license. I did not know that there was a license requirement. So good news, David. We could probably get next day delivery on a crocodile or a tiger. Maybe there's room behind the green room for it. But this is just, there's so many things that we could talk about with you. Is there anything that's really top of mind that we haven't covered or talked about that you're like, no, I'd really like to make sure to mention or talk about this, that you can think of?
I mean, again, sort of the issues that are kind of coming up for us, certainly in the UK, housing is an issue. We've had a couple of pieces of legislation enacted sort of the next couple of days, and I think that's one of the big things. And without kind of trying to plug abstracts at NIHA, that's another abstract I've submitted around sort of how the UK enforces housing standards, and it would be interesting to see how colleagues in the States, what their experiences are. I suspect we're a bit stricter. We're clear in what we want to do. We've got more powers. But that would be interesting because, you know, housing, like most things, it's going to affect health. And as environmental health practitioners, we got to look at how people are living and the conditions they're living in. So that, I think, is coming up on the horizon and is something I'd like to talk about in NIHA.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And that even touches on like economic justice and issues too, right? I saw something that you had done when you were speaking before. It was a really sobering graphic, and the tube for Americans the subway. You had a graphic that showed from this end of the line to that end of the line, the life expectancy went down like a year plus. Housing conditions were worse. Their food quality was worse, and it shows up in everything from obesity to life expectancy. Back to your point, if it's all tied together, am I straining the example there, or is that a part of it when you talk housing?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the example is it's part of the tube line in London, so the subway, and it starts at Westminster, which is kind of the posh part of London. And there's 7 stops to a place called Canning Town, which is a non-posh part of London. And for each stop on the tube, you lose a year of life expectancy.
For each stop?
Wow. Each stop. So it's 7 years difference. But when you look at it on a map, they are only 2 or 3 miles apart.
Wow.
And just because you live in a certain place, your life expectancy drops by 7 years. And I did some work with, I was fortunate to go up to Southern Connecticut State University and do a bit of teaching with them. And so I pulled up some American issues, and it's the same in the States.
Is it really?
Yeah, I think it was somewhere in Philadelphia, and sort of different zip codes, and in between zip codes, it was something like 25 years.
Wow.
Because your zip code was different. And it ties into everything you're saying. It's poor quality housing, it's access to decent food, it's access to decent water, it's access to services. It is everything. And one of the recent things I've heard, and I kind of like this now, is that health is not found in hospitals. Health is found in your communities, and health is found in your environment. And my favorite definition of environment comes from Albert Einstein, which is my environment is everything that isn't me.
Wow.
And that's what we're saying to students now. Health is not found in hospitals. Health is dictated and found out in the communities. And that's where we need to focus.
Really, really, really well said. We will, as we get closer, once as we get towards NEHA next year and those abstracts end up getting reviewed and scheduled, I have a hunch you're going to end up doing 2 presentations. But I'd have you come back and you can do more of a preview once you know kind of the when, where, time, and plug those. Both of those are really, really fascinating. Also a little bit depressing. But it goes back to what you're saying of you have to actually address problems head on. If you don't actually look at the data, you're never going to come up with policy to actually get those life expectancies or whatever the issue you're trying to solve is back into line. So I'm glad somebody's looking at it, and it would be really interesting to see how that data that you're bringing from the UK does overlay here, because I suspect we do have the same thing, maybe even worse in some cases. Back to what you said about the patchwork of state-by-state rules. There are housing rules in some states where you would not want to live in what the minimum standards are that you're allowed to as a tenant. So...
yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to go to Oakland a few years ago with the California Environmental Health Association. And I remember walking into a presentation. I was a couple of minutes late because I got delayed. And as they were talking about housing, and I sort of looked at it and thought, why are they talking about prisons? And it wasn't a prison. It was the housing for the fruit workers out in California.
Oh, geez. Yeah. Migrant labor camps are actually something that, like Florida, Texas, a lot of the ag states have those programs under EH. They don't have a lot of teeth.
Yeah.
It really don't. So we will definitely have you back because there's this. You're so well-rounded and you've done so much over your career. I really do appreciate you, though, joining for, about an hour and 20 minutes now. One of the real thought leaders globally. And so glad that you were able to come and spend some time with us. And Tina, did you say that you guys had one more thing in the control room, or did I? No, you did not. Okay. I misread a cue card they held up. I thought they said they had one more thing to put up on the screen, but Graeme, all the way from the UK, and you are a senior, I got the title right? Senior lecturer at Liverpool University. And how's y'all's football team doing there this year?
Not so good.
Not so good.
We were doing great at the beginning of the season. We've lost 5 games on the trot. It's trying at the moment, but Form is temporary, class is permanent.
Well said. As a American football Carolina Panthers, because they're the team here where I grew up, I know the feeling. Like they'll give you just enough spark of life sometimes early to make you think, all right, we might be turning a corner, and then no, it just gets really ugly from there. So Graeme Mitchell from Liverpool joining us here today. A really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for all you do and all the work you do and the miles you fly and travel to bring information in a global world beyond just your own borders. Real pleasure to talk to you today.
Brilliant. Cameron, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Graeme Mitchell from Liverpool University, an EH leading light. We'll talk to him again sometime. Thank you all so much. Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. For all of us here, the Beyond Data Management podcast, powered every week. Tuesdays, new episodes drop every Tuesday by HS GovTech. I'm Cameron Garrison. We will see you again next Tuesday.